Good morning, everyone. We apologize for our delayed broadcast because we have some technical adjustments going on. So now, okay, I would like to welcome everyone who's here with us at this moment. Okay, so I think our participants is coming in. So maybe while we are waiting for everyone to settle down, I would like first to introduce, of course, our webinar for today is entitled In the Dark Web, Perils of Online Sexual Exploitation of Children. So this webinar is made possible through the cooperation and partnership of these three organizations, the Salvation Army, which began in work in the Philippines in 1937 and are registered as religious and charity organization, as well as having registered social services and educational programs. Meanwhile, World Hope International works in 15 countries, and the world helping all people regardless of ethnicity and gender, race, or religion. WHI served the poorest of the poor who's crippled by lack of opportunity. It started its operation in 2017. So the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Person leads the Department of State's global effort to combat modern slavery through the prosecution of traffickers, the protection of victims, and the prevention of human trafficking. On April 11, 2017, the United States and the Philippines signed the U.S.-Philippines Child Protection Compact Partnership, a 4-year plan developed jointly by our two governments that documents the commitment of our governments to achieve the specified shared objectives related to increasing prevention efforts and protections of child victims of online sexual exploitation. The child labor trafficking in the Philippines and holding perpetrators of these crimes accountable. So the Salvation Army and World Hope International partnered in implementing the Protecting at-Risk Children Vulnerable to Exploitation under the protection pillars of the CPC to build the capacity of shelter workers and shelter to care for children who have experienced online sexual exploitation. So the Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Sexual Abuse, or CPTCSA, is a non-stock, non-profit organization and was established in 1994. The organization's vision is working towards a safe world for children free from sexual abuse, and their mission is to be the leading agency in the prevention and treatment of child sexual abuse through innovative programs that bridge gaps so that services are available to all schools, households, and communities nationwide. So on behalf of World Hope International, Salvation Army, and CPTCSA, welcome. We'd like to welcome all participants to this webinar. So currently we have 488 and counting with us today. And thank you very much for being with us. So today I will be your moderator, and I'm Gina Lumpero. I'm from CPTCSA. So we know that this abuse or the online sexual exploitation of children results to complex mental health disturbances among the survivors. It likewise poses challenges to the care providers in supporting them with therapeutic interventions given the complicated dynamics of the abuse. So this webinar will focus on the nature and impact of this budding form of trafficking involving children. It serves an introductory course to the therapeutic intervention for online sexual exploitation of children survivors. So specifically, this webinar aims for us participants to be informed about the nature and prevalence of online sexual exploitation of children, understand the impact of OSEC victimization to the well-being of survivors, and understand the intervention that works with this vulnerable population, and be aware of reporting and referral mechanisms for OSEC. So with us today, we are joined with experts on this field to discuss the following topics. So our first topic for this morning, for this webinar, is OSEC phenomenon in the Philippines. This will be presented by Ms. Adesti Dulawan, and it will be followed by mental health outcomes in support for OSEC survivors, and this will be by Dr. Dorieta Valderrama, and then the presentation on research findings on psychosocial needs of OSEC survivors by Ms. Haley Clark, and psychosocial services for OSEC survivors by Miss Cindy Pearl Melencio. So, okay, everyone, we are set to go. So currently we have 500 plus participants for this webinar. Again, thank you, and I would like to remind everyone that we can use hashtag ending OSEC for this. So let's go to our first presentation. So are we ready? So I'm quite excited for this. So for our first topic, I would like to introduce our first speaker to discuss about OSEC phenomenon in the Philippines. So Ms. Adesti Dulawan is the clinical supervisor of World Hope International in the Philippines. She is a licensed psychologist and counselor with more than 10 years in experience in the mental health profession, specializing in psychological assessment and psychotherapy for treatment of mental disorders. She completed her master's in counseling and in psychology from Cagayan State University and ranked 6th place in the National Counseling Board examination in 2010. She is presently completing her PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Santo Tomas Graduate School. She also served as the consultant psychologist at St. Luke's Medical Center, Quezon City. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Adesti Dulawan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. We are very privileged to have you today. So, what I'm going to discuss, by the way, I'm Adesti Dulawan. I am with World Hope International. So what I'm going to discuss today is to just give you an overview of what is OSEC. But to give you first an introduction, there is a limited information about this budding form of trafficking. But what I am going to discuss are information that are available from researches that have been conducted. But first, I'd like to start by posing a question for all of you. Like, in terms of technology, what are the perks of technology? I believe we all agree that it has lots of perks, and we saw that especially now that many of us are working from home, we are doing online classes and all those. And those are the really good side of technology because it's facilitating ease, it's facilitating mobilization of information, among others. However, as some other good things also have perils along with it. And so in terms of technology, what are the dark side or what are the downside of technology? And that is what we are going to discuss today, specifically the perils of technology, which is it serving as a platform for abuse and exploitation of children. So I'm going to discuss the overview of OSEC and starting off with how is Filipino behaving online. In the data of Digital 2018, it showed that there are 7 million internet users in 2017, and that is representing 63% of the entire 105.7 million of Filipinos. And a typical Filipino, you all know, is actually spending about 9 hours and 29 minutes in a day just being online. And I think everybody knows this, that Philippines is the world's leading social media user with 67 million Filipinos in social media. This is according to We Are Social. So in short, Filipinos are very much fond of the internet. Now, how does it happen? What are characteristics of the internet that are being used for abuse? To begin with, there are characteristics of the internet that is making it easy for it to be used for abuse, and that's called the AAA engine, whereby in internet it makes everything very accessible. It facilitates accessibility to many things, to information, like globally you can just reach somewhere else just by being in the internet. And then another is, of course, the affordability. There's it's very cheap to access internet, even especially here in the Philippines. And then another characteristic of the internet that is making it easy to be used for abuse is that the fact that anyone using in the internet can be anonymous. So all these three interplay together, could be facilitating for abuse to happen in the internet. Now, let's look into the profile of children online, or the online sexual exploitation of children. OSEC is technically an emerging form of exploitation. It's actually one of the budding form of human trafficking, whereby there's exploitation and child sexual abuse that happens in information and technology medium. This could be through online platforms, it could be in applications, it could be also in mobile phones. It involves the production, possession, and distribution of child sexual abuse materials and the gradual grooming of target victims, purposely for live streaming of sexual abuse or exploitation. But we all have to know that even the definition of OSEC itself is very much debatable. Up to now, many organizations are still working on having, like a unified definition of OSEC. One thing that we also have to understand about OSEC is that it's not um, it's not one form of abuse. It's an array of different forms of abuse, which includes child sexual abuse material, as well as digitally produced child sexual abuse material, or in general, this is child pornography. And then there's also online grooming, there's also sexting, there's also sexual extortion, and of course, there's live online child sexual abuse. And what we are going to focus on for this webinar is OSEC in forms of the abuse or exploitation that is performed through the use of live webcam, and children are induced to perform commercial sexual acts or other explicit sexual acts and are broadcasted over the internet. This would include sexually explicit photographs, which are sold via the web to the live streaming of sexual abuse. So because this is this is the type of OSEC that we have been working on for the past 2 years. We are in this definition of OSEC, which means to say this is trafficking, and it doesn't involve the other forms of online sexual abuse in the internet, such as sexual extortion, among others. Now, let's move towards the prevalence of OSEC. When we say prevalence of OSEC, because it happens online, there is actually no concrete figures as to how many incidents there are of OSEC, because it happens online and the crime can be easily concealed. But then I'm going to give you figures based on what data are available. And then to start off with, let's try to discuss first how the Filipino child is in the cyberspace. And in the data of Stairway Foundation in 2015, it showed that 90% of Filipino children have access to and are using the internet. So this is quite surprising, because that's 90% of Filipino children are actually having access to the internet. And that at their age are mostly 7 to 12, they are already able to access the internet. And the surprising fact is that 40% of children aged 13 to 16 years old have shared that they've already chatted with strangers online. And then in addition to that, there are 1 in 10 children who claimed that they knew someone, perhaps their peers, their classmates, their friends, or their cousins, who had been asked to strip naked online as well in exchange for money or phone credit. In a more recent study by UNICEF, it was found also, it confirmed that 2.5% of Filipino children have been streamed nude or performing sexual acts in the internet via a personal computer or a smartphone. So that's 2.5% of Filipino children. And the prevalence consists of 3.2% among males and 1.8% among females. In addition, it was also found in the same study that there's 8 out of 10 Filipinos are at the risk of being victims of sexual abuse or bullying online. So as you can see, there's lots of abuses that are happening online involving Filipino children. And this made the Philippines, because of this high prevalence, it made the Philippines the global epicenter of live stream sexual abuse. In a more recent data as well, IGM reported that the number of rescue and arrest operations related to cybersex business in the Philippines escalated from just 17 in 2015 to 51 in the first 9 months of 2018. The first reported case of OSEC in the Philippines is in 2011. And then, throughout those years, in just a decade, it spiraled up. And then another notable trend among these rescues is that the victim's age is getting younger, whereby the mean age is 12, and the rescues recently are getting really younger, and 1 in 10 are boys. So the ones rescued from OSEC are predominantly female Filipino children. And in the most recent data of IJM, it was confirmed that Philippines is indeed the global epicenter of OSEC, because they found that 43 out of every 10,000 IPs or internet protocols addresses in the internet globally that are being used for child sexual exploitation in 2014 has ballooned to 149 per 10,000 IPs in 2017. And that another notable thing about this research of IGM is that 41% of victims' abuse was facilitated by biological parents, and 42% by other relatives, or at least 83% by people related to the child victims. So this confirms the experiences that we see on the ground, whereby most of these children were facilitated into the abuse by people they know. And sadly, most of the time, it's often members of their family. And just within the previous 4 months, because of the COVID lockdown, I believe some of you became interested into this webinar because you saw this oftentimes in the news for the past few months. COVID really facilitated the rapid increase in the OSEC cases. And there's been a report that the sexual exploitation of children online tripled during this lockdown. Why? There's lots of factors into that, like if the perpetrators online are already or in quarantine, and that Filipino families here in the Philippines are quarantined as well with very limited resources to survive. Thus, the combination of that facilitated scaling up of OSEC in the midst of COVID. Now the question is, how does OSEC victimization happen? I wanted us to understand, why is it that OSEC is happening, or how does it happen in the first place? There's a concept called grooming, which is something that is peculiar or distinct in OSEC victimization. Grooming is a process by which a person prepares a child, significant adults, and the environment for the abuse of this child. Or in general, this is normalizing the abuse by rewiring morals, rewiring standards, rewiring information in the brain of the child. The survivors who are usually heavily influenced by their families. As we said a while ago, most of their offline facilitators are their family members. And there is also something within the Filipino value system where we are family-centric, making it very easy for parents to use that to appeal to children's emotion, invading duty to earn money for the family. And I think we all agree to that as a child in the family, there is that notion where it's our duty to help out in the family. And they remind their children that the money they will earn from the sexual shows will pay the bill. And so this facilitates intensive grooming, which you will see later on the effects in the succeeding discussions later, that it's quite difficult because it's so ingrained in the brain of the child that what happened to them is normal. It's not an abuse because of this grooming. And remember, it becomes deeply ingrained because when they do sexual shows, what comes after are usually reinforcement. And we all know by principle of learning that if the antecedent of a behavior is positive, such as a reward or a reinforcement, for example, they're able to buy Jollibee for food, or they get verbal praises from their parents from the sexual shows, that facilitates learning the abuse as something that is okay or as something that is normal. And so in terms of the victimization process itself, there's usually an initial contact between the online sex buyer or the online sex predator, and is facilitated by family members. And this happens usually through dating sites, public chat rooms, social networking sites, or in some others in more organized places, such as in cyber dens. So, but then with the recent findings, it showed that it does not necessarily happen in the deeply encrypted sites or in the dark web. It actually even happens even in just Messenger, in just Facebook. So some of the perpetrators are as confident as that they can just easily contact Filipino children, even in just the surface of the web and not necessarily in the dark web. And then after arrangement comes the sexual performances. And this range from many things, from just dancing, to stripping off, to showing genitals, to self-stimulation by children, or having sexual intercourse with another child or adult. If you hear the stories of the survivor, it's really disheartening about the acts that they are made to do, just so they are going to be paid by the perpetrators. Some even have had to do sexual acts with their very own siblings, and sometimes are abused by some adults in the family with the sexual predator watching online. And then after which, of course, payments are agreed, whereby there's lots of money transfer services here in the Philippines, and that's being used like Western Union or bank transfer, among others. And so that's how the victimization happens, and it can be repeated again. In the OSEC story, there are two facilitators of abuse. That is something that we need to understand about this form of abuse. There is an online abuser and there's the offline facilitator. So the online sex predator is the one paying for the abuse, and the offline abuser is the family, the parent, the neighbor, or the cousin or the peer who are introducing the child to this form of exploitation. But I'd like us to understand them in a way that's deeper. And so let's try to look at the information available about how are these families, how do they look like, and also the online facilitators. In the data from Terra de Homes, it was shown that child victims are mostly from very poor families. So there's usually these are usually families without steady income, or those who have transitory jobs like just for laundry or carpentry, those without steady source of income. And most of the time, they really come from very impoverished communities. And then child victims are usually from homes that are generally characterized as dysfunctional due to poor parenting skills and large family size. Generally, these children are from families with a large number of children, and usually their parents have very poor parenting skills because remember, what they are trying to do is to really just survive each day, and so parenting their children is something that they don't give much attention to, or they don't attend to a lot to that. And then it was also found that two, 1 in 2 children, 1 in 2 OSEC survivors reported that there's substance abuse present in the family, and it's usually alcohol and drugs. And we also hear this a lot directly from our clients, where there's usually really involvement of alcohol and drugs with their parents or their other relative facilitators. And corporal punishment is also present, where it could also be qualified actually, of course, as physical abuse, and it's typically employed by most parents of the survivors. And another is that emotional abuse is very prevalent. The children reported, when you talk to these children, you would hear that some of their parents are really degrading in terms of towards their self-esteem. So they are often criticized, degraded, or even humiliated by their parents or other family members. And that there are identified patterns of this is confirmed also by a more recent data by UNICEF, where there's unhealthy behaviors common among the survivors' family, where emotional abuse is really prevalent. This tells us that OSEC is just the tip of the iceberg. Before OSEC, there are so many abuses within the family that are already happening. Substance use, physical abuse, emotional abuse, among others. And OSEC is just the tip of the problem within the family. So that's why when working with OSEC survivors, it's we usually try to really involve the family because of these findings that the problem is really within the system and not really with the child. Now let's look at the other perpetrators in this OSEC abuse story, the online perpetrators. Most of the online sexual abusers found to be chatting with the young girls in the Philippines are typically Western men. And it was found that this crime is mostly committed by consumers in developed and affluent countries, mostly Western. But then there are also reports of local perpetrators. So, and that's also been increasing. But in terms of data, there's really still more Western perpetrators. But I'd like us to dig deeper as to what are the characteristics of these online perpetrators? What is it that is happening with them that is usually pushing them into engaging into these types of abuses? There are actually studies that looked into the dynamics, the personality, the mental health of online perpetrators. And in one study, it was found that 50% of the online perpetrators who are usually into child pornography and OSEC have very low levels of dominance and worth, suggesting self-consciousness and lack of assertiveness. So there's usually lack of empathy in personal relationships. All of these are leading towards very poor interpersonal difficulties. And then they usually lack healthy or intimate relationships because, of course, of their difficulty to form and sustain age-appropriate relationships. This is telling us that most of them do not have quality, significant relationships. And when you go online, you can easily just talk with people online. You can easily just connect with people online. And so it seems to show that they go online, they seek for children to be abused online because in there they have, you know, like a greater sense of self-esteem because of the anonymity. And yeah, there's more confidence because of the anonymity that the internet provides and the access to children. It was also found in the same study that many of these online perpetrators have dysphoric mood and high levels of depression. And so they themselves are usually really having mental health disturbances. In another more recent data, it was also found that those who are having online interactions or online sexual abuse usually do this to alleviate their loneliness and to see such interactions as a way to reduce their intimacy deficits. And that because, you know, like when you are online, there's a minimal risk of you being rejected, which is usually that fear driven by low self-esteem. And now, this points us to the question, why is it that OSEC happens? Why does OSEC happen? And there are so many factors, okay, which are not, of course, the primary reason, but there are risk factors and vulnerability factors that are driving OSEC. And one of which is that, to start with, children are in the position of vulnerability, and that the adults within their sphere, within their family, should be in the protective positions but are not doing their responsibilities. Their parents, their aunts, for example, are supposed to be the ones shielding them from abuse but are not doing that responsibility. Another is, as I mentioned a while ago, it's usually driven by poverty. And with all those combined, plus high-speed internet, cheap internet in the Philippines, and the high level of English literacy in the Philippines, individuals are able to connect more easily to international perpetrators. So these are just some driving factors. But ultimately, why does OSEC happen? OSEC happens because there is a demand among abusers. It happens because there are abusers who are willing to pay to watch a child being abused for their own sexual pleasure. This person is usually in a higher power because he has money to pay for the exploitation to happen. Which now leads us to think about, what can we do then to help in ending OSEC? And I hope at the end of this webinar, we will all be motivated to really do something to help out in ending OSEC. There are, of course, many things that we can do to end OSEC, and first of which is to be informed. That's why it's very good that you are here today, because we need to be aware. We cannot deny that it is happening in the Philippines, that there are so many Filipino children who are being victimized by this form of abuse, and that we need to be vigilant because this happens, we don't know, sometimes within our church community, within among our neighbors, even among our family members. So we just need to be vigilant. Remember, it happens very privately. And so it takes for us to be more vigilant. And of course, to be more caring enough to listen. Especially for some teachers here, this happens a lot in school. So if we only care enough to talk to students, to listen to them, and even among our interpersonal relationships, if only we become more caring enough and we listen, we will hear some stories, because again, it's really happening. And of course, very important is that we have to be empowered to report. As mentioned earlier, the Philippine government is committed to curb this form of abuse. They just need people to um, to report these forms of abuse, and all of us as citizens have this responsibility to report. And so, what I want you to do, I just picked this out from the senator's site. What I want you to do is to please, if you are using your phone, take a screenshot of this. This contains lots of numbers where you can report. Take a screenshot or use your phone to copy this one. And again, I'd like to urge all of you as helping professionals, which most of us are, we all have a role to play in the healing and recovery of OSEC survivors. And I do hope that you will be with us, you will be on board with us in ending OSEC. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aristi, for that presentation. So before we move on to our next presenter, I would like to remind everyone that if you have questions, we have a Q&A box in our screen, so we can just write our question there. And again, our hashtag is ending OSEC. So for our next presenter, to give us, to discuss about the mental health outcomes in support of OSEC survivors, is a child and adolescent psychiatrist at the Philippine General Hospital Child Protection Unit. She is also a professor at the College of Medicine, University of the Philippines, Manila, and she is also a chair of the Department of Psychiatry at University of the East, Ramon Magsaysay Memorial Medical Center, Incorporated. She likewise is a consultant psychiatrist at St. Luke's Medical Center in the Medical City. She also previously served as the chairperson of the Philippine Board of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and president of the Philippine Psychiatric Association. She also worked for years as consultant to major programs of the government and NGOs on child protection and treatment of survivors. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Norieta Valderrama.
Okay. So a pleasant good morning. Okay. So I'm very glad to be with you this morning. So I was asked to talk about mental health and support systems that we can give to OSEC survivors. Okay, so how's everybody? Maybe you can take a deep breath. So after one lecture, you can probably inhale and then hold it and then exhale. Okay, so my topic is about mental health outcomes and support for OSEC survivors. Next, please. Okay, so the next. So this was what we experienced before, and now this is the experience that we have. We now see that a lot of children are into our computers. And next, please. So the objective of this session will be, of course, to explain the mental health outcomes affected by OSEC and then the role of health and provision of therapeutic care to aid recovery of children affected by online sexual abuse. Next, please. Okay. So basically, to answer the objective, the support system for OSEC, as was already indicated in the first presentation, is multi-system. It needs all of us. So from the school system to the legal system, the police, social workers, the hospitals, all of us are needed. And if you look at the outcome, we see that online child sexual abuse may actually lead to a wide range of psychological symptoms, from anxiety to trauma, depression, and then you have risky behaviors and suicide depending on the developmental age of the child. So a lot of these can be similar to other types of abuse like sexual abuse. Next, please. Okay. So in the Philippines, just a summary of what was said already, we can just see here that out of 18% children with unwanted sexual experience online, we can see the difference here is 17% said that family members were involved, usually parents and even other siblings, and that 2 in 10 children are vulnerable victims of online sexual abuse and exploitation. So this is the 2018 baseline report of UNICEF. Next, please. Okay, so we already had a summary of the different types of child abuse and exploitation, from made-to-order material to generation of content, including sexting, broadcasting it live, and then a lot of sexual images, and even blackmail. Next, please. Okay, so we can see here in the Philippines, there is high risk because of poverty and lack of knowledge on the effects, and they deem it as something that is normal, that, you know, that because there is no face-to-face and they are not being touched, and therefore they're not going to be affected. But we know that the most vulnerable population are the ones who have history of sexual abuse or prior problematic. The family structure or dynamics is very problematic. And we know that there's a lot of access on how to do it, which was discussed before this. Next, please. And of course, the brain. So we always talk about the brain being affected. In fact, when we do the trauma-informed care modules and the trauma-informed psychosocial processing, we emphasize the need to consider that the effect of OSEC can also be multifactorial, from the biological, the brain, to psychological, to the physical, and even spiritual. And we all know this, the gory details about an 18-month-old girl being sexually assaulted while being tied upside down. And, you know, this can be viewed, no, on video. Next, please. Okay, so we can see here that the children most at risk online are usually those who are sensation seekers. They have low level satisfaction with their lives and with their families. And in the Philippines, as we've said, it is more complex because of the participation of family and relatives. So in other words, the risk is not just with the child, but with the dynamics in relation to the family, and the coercion or the motivation in relation to the needs of family members. And adolescents taking most at risk online were the more likely to have negative consequences. Next, please. Okay, so in the Philippines, there's a study that using the internet, you have 5 times a week, but the odds are increased 4 times for those visiting X-rated websites. We know that in the Philippines, the odds of experiencing internet harassment or sexual solicitation is twice for those who already are giving out personal information, those who are interacting with unknown persons, and of course, having unknown persons on body lists. That's why parents should caution their children that they shouldn't add unknown persons in their body list. Okay, next please. And if you look at the CPU statistics, we can see here the increasing number of textmate or chatmate who is the sexual abuse perpetrator. So this is up to 20 uh, in the early 2013-12. Next, please. Okay, so we already know this who are at risk for online victimization because we are discussing the risk because it can redound to later on more difficult outcomes for these children. So basically, if we look at the pattern of the online behavior, which is more important compared to the internet itself, and also the psychosocial problems, meaning that in order to discuss the outcome and the effects, we will have to look at the pattern of online behaviors, the dynamics of the family, and which is the psychosocial problems that are already with the family. And so they are at risk. And we can see here that almost all of the youth reporting online victimization also reported at least one offline victimization. And you already see this in the 75% study of the A study. We know that 75% of those studied among individuals in the Philippines had at least one adverse childhood experience. So very high number of adverse childhood experience, and then you add the victimization online, and therefore you have more problems in terms of mental health effects. Next, please. Okay, so if you look at the impact, sometimes you don't see it in the beginning. Most children will be silent. They feel that sometimes they will feel that because they were willing participants, and so they are going to blame themselves, and there is a sense of guilt and shame. So in the beginning, they will say they are smiling, or that they feel that it is normal, that they're not going to be affected. But later on, one of the sequelae is a sense of guilt and shame. And very few children disclose sexual abuse. And on top of it, even fewer will disclose abuse when this is occurring online or using the internet. So it is really a challenge for all of us to find these children who are being victimized. Next, please. Okay. So as we've said, many forms of online sexual exploitation involve the same dynamics, patterns, and structure as non-digital ones. So there is an overlap, but there are a few differences, and we have more challenges. There are multiple ongoing traumatizing aspects of online sexual exploitation. Next, please. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so what are these challenges? So the challenge is that affects the mental health of these children is, previous one. Okay, is that they are being photographed during the abuse. So the trigger can be something that's related to the camera, fear of being recognized online. So some will shut their all their apps, and they will later on realize that images can be available indefinitely up to when they grow older. So we've seen testimony of individuals who were abused online when they were children, and later on they are already successful. We even had one who was a lawyer, and the way she dealt with it was she was talking about it and how it affected her life. So it is basically lifelong. So these children may actually keep it in secret. Some may actually deal with it by talking about it, processing it, and being in therapy. So very important to say that usually trauma symptoms when we see these children, because I supervise social workers who see these children, and I see some of these children who go to our clinics at the CPU and all the other centers. it is possible that immediately after the abuse, you don't see any symptoms, but we talk to the family and we say you will have to monitor some of the signs and symptoms, because later on when they realize it is something that is going to affect them, then emotionally, the abuse can actually be ongoing because of the realization that it's never ending. There is no definable end. Next, please. Okay. So with the research of Livingstone and Smith, fewer than 1 in 5 adolescents were affected by negative sexual experiences online. And another research said that Hamilton and et al. Abuse involved the sense of inability to control, that it is actually going to be permanent out there somewhere, that it can be used as a blackmail, and so they can be re-victimized and they are going to blame themselves. And that's if they are unable to deal with it, or they don't go into therapy or have better coping mechanisms, they definitely will blame themselves. And we see that 4 out of 5 are the score consistent with diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And we can already see this among the cases that are presented during our supervisions, that a lot of them do suffer from PTSD, not just because of the online sexual exploitation, but because of all the other problems compounded by the dynamics, the difficulties that they are facing. Next, please. Okay, so the factors contributing to victimization can be all of this: the offline victimization, online perpetration, conflict in the family community, and also online display and disclosure of personal information. And so you have the online victimization. Next, please. Okay. So now we go to the impact. No? So what happens afterwards? So what exacerbates the effect of trauma? So you have sexual abuse and online sexual abuse. So the difference is they lack control of online images. So if you go to Crame, for example, it is actually the way they describe their experiences very difficult to control what is out there already. You can may control a few of the sites, but because there are others who would share it, there is a possibility it's just going to pop and be there again. So lack of control. And then the permanence of the images. So in your mind, if it's going to be permanent, it can be difficult. And that there is a threat that you are going to be surveilled. So even if you're a prominent person, because of that, there's a threat that it's ongoing, that people are actually looking at all of these images. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, so again, as we've said, aside from the dynamics as we see it among the offline, we can see online that it is multiple and ongoing trauma. That's one of the difference, that they can be recognized anytime, anywhere because of the computers and all the gadgets, especially in this time when we are all in quarantine. And so what happens is shame and humiliation because they are now public domain, and they may be harmed because sometimes they have to recount these memories, and they may even think about it and feel about it. And so what is challenging even to experts around the world is what are we saying? Are established approaches for conventional child sexual abuse adequate? So what we're saying is what we know is helpful, but we will have to add a plus. So our approaches for conventional CSA plus. So there should be a plus factor for this because of all the factors that we've already mentioned. Next, please. Okay. So again, the outcome. No? So what happens? So most of the common things that we see among these children is later on they blame themselves. So maybe it's not immediate, but later on they will blame themselves for saying yes, doing it. They could have PTSD symptoms like flashbacks or intrusive thoughts. They could be depressed and have low self-esteem, problems with sleeping. They could have anxiety and panic attacks. And we also see children who actually commit suicide and have thoughts of harming themselves. And in general, they may have school-related problems. Next, please. Okay. So again, these are some of the things that we see. There's a fear of images being shared, and that they are uncomfortable around cameras, anything to do with cameras. They also feel so tired because they always try to look if it is out there. And so there is increased risk of having risky behaviors. In my first slide, as I've said, so they will drink. That is why in the Philippines, we also, among the adverse childhood experiences, one of the culprits and problem is actually taking alcohol. So they may also take drugs because of this, or because their brain is not functioning, their prefrontal cortex is not functioning, they do not see the consequences, and therefore they will run away and they will have low self-esteem. Next, please. Okay. So as I've said, in the end, they're going to blame themselves for allowing the abuse. And this is aggravated by the dynamics within the family, where they may not be supported by the family, and say, in one community, for example, in the Philippines, where it is prevalent, where the community accepts it, and even some of the leaders of the community would know about it. And so if you have this, then it can be more difficult, especially if the parents are also part of the perpetrators. Next, please. Okay. So Johnson and Fred Lang et al. In 2019 said that the socio-demographic background of the survivors or victims are usually those with less favorable background, which is also in the Philippines. We have low socioeconomic background, but we do have individuals in the middle class and, who can afford. But the ones that are referred to us are mostly in the low socioeconomic background. And the parents that they've seen in the research were unemployed. They had lower level of education. The child did not also live with the parents, maybe with a relative, and they're more likely with poorer financial situation. Although the fact about financial situation was not statistically significant in their research. Next, please. Okay, so according to the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Mental Health of Johnson and Friedland, they say that they are exposed to different types of abuse during their childhood, including physical abuse. So those who are victims of online sexual exploitation can also have previous history of abuse. And in the Philippines, you can also see that we have cases that we have to deal with, not just the online sexual exploitation, but the psychological and physical abuse. You know, there's a thin line between in the Philippines where corporal punishment can be acceptable. And what we can highlight here is that the ones that we have seen, trauma is related to being rescued. So we have cases where they are not in the beginning affected by the fact that they showed the images, but they are more traumatized by the process of rescue. That is why this was given a protocol, and now we're happy to say that most of our rescuers are aware of this, and though they're very careful with how they rescue the children. But sometimes it really can be very challenging and difficult. Next, please. Okay, so again, we cite the same study. They usually have poorer relationship with both their mothers and fathers. And the background is they have less parental care, and they have lower self-esteem. And it was said that those both abused online and offline scored higher trauma symptoms than those abused only online. So the difference in terms of the presentation of the effects is significant only on the subscale of depression, and all the other like trauma symptoms were not significant. So in the Philippines, as we can see, in the beginning, they do not present with trauma symptoms in relation to the OSEC in the beginning, and the trauma symptoms and the depression will only come out later on when they are separated from their family. So they become depressed and they have to deal with the separation. Okay. Now about people having sexual contact with persons of same age. Again, meeting a person online increases the risk of facing negative consequences. We've had cases as far as of course, the Mindanao, where they, in all parts of the country, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, where you have meeting a person, no, online, and then they also meet persons around the world. And we can see here that the risk is there. That's why they shouldn't include people that they do not know. Okay, next please. Okay, again, the more severe form of abuse, the more serious the subsequent associated health issues, which tells us it is same with a study, where in the A study, when you have more adverse childhood experiences, then the more problems you're going to have with your mental health and physical health. More adverse childhood experiences will redound to more increased risk for suicide and mental health problems. Okay, so it is associated with poor health, low self-esteem, and then poorer relationship between parent and child. Next, please. Okay, so if you look at other effects, you can see, for example, those with both online and offline scored highest in terms of all the effects, agreeing to the fact that if you have polyvictimization, the more serious and severe the effects on the child. In the Philippines, we use what we call the PTAQ that was done by Dr. Lanes. And so you can see that a lot of these children do have more than 30 score, no? The number 30. And a lot of them, that is why we always say in the middle of the therapy, we'll want to get the score, the trauma score, because sometimes they will appear not in the beginning, but in the middle or much later. Next, please. Okay, so in the Philippines, there is in general a mixed presentation of depression and other trauma symptoms. But of course, we need to get the numbers and the research about this. And most of the depression is not exactly with the images in the beginning, but in relation to their separations. So the trauma is in relation to the rescue process, whereas the depression is in relation to the separation and changes in the family structure, and being the carrying the burden of having to change the structure of the family, or that they will not have food on the table because the supply from the online exploitation has stopped. And as I've said, later as time goes by, that is when we see the trauma symptomatology. Next, please. Okay, and again, there is increased risk of being victimized again, which we can see also offline. If there is abuse, there is increased risk. That's why in therapy, we make sure that there is a part where they will make sure that they are safe, because the behavior is that some of them may actually want to look online, and when they look online, they're curious, then that is when the victim, so then there's a cycle, they become victims again. Next, please. Okay, so they usually belong to the polyvictimized group. As we've said, in the Philippines, they do not have good relationship with the family. or that the family coerce them, or that the family or the parents do not have time to supervise activities of children. They will just leave them there. So if you have 10 children, you have 6 children, you cannot monitor them. And because parents will have to earn a living, and it's very difficult to supervise a lot of children, or that some of these parents would go abroad. And so when we see these parents, they are really depressed also, because they want to earn for their children, and yet their children will be victims of online sexual exploitation. Next, please. Okay. So those are the outcomes that we see, no, in terms of mental health, in summary. So now let's look at the treatment, the support. Of course, they need all our support, but all professionals agree now that there is still no definite. So it is really a group of therapeutic modalities that will help these children. And most of these therapies are also being used for children who are abused offline, which is what we're doing in the Philippines. We're using the trauma-informed psychosocial processing, which is CBT based, where in the beginning you want to educate them about abuse, online exploitation, and then you want them to have better coping mechanisms, and then you go through the process of processing the experience slowly, the telling and retelling, and then the meaning making, and lastly, making sure that they know how to behave so that they are going to be safe. Okay, so it's important to include other approaches. It's not just the trauma-focused behavior therapy, but initial findings about the effectiveness of the tells us that it is indeed helping these children. Next, please. Okay, so again, we consider the developmental stage of the child. So we know that it's a challenge for the very young, less than 3, and then the preschool, school age, and the adolescents. So basically, these are just tips. We need to review the way in which one tells a child about the recorded images, and then we do not interview in front of the parents somewhere when we do our work. And then we also need time to talk to the parents to educate them, especially if they also are either part of the process as offender, or they are the non-offending parent. And of course, those with boyfriend, we will have to check because they feel that they are actually in love. And we know that all of the services, social services, the police, legal, psychological, so all of this will be needed in order, and at the same time, in order to help these children. It's not one by one, it's all at the same time. Next, please. Okay, so we emphasize also, we have a module which is trauma-informed care, that for OSEC, we also assume, like in this COVID, you assume that everyone is infected. So we try to be careful with ourselves that we do not spread it, that we are not infected. Same with trauma-informed care. We assume that they are suffering from trauma, and therefore we are going to be careful when we talk to these children. We plan the interview, time, place, manner of interview, so we do not add to the difficulties that they are having. And then you consider the interview, if it is going to be recorded or not, because videotaping may further traumatize the child, or if you have multiple interviews. That's why at the child protection unit, we only have one interview, and when they go to the mental health professional, we usually do not talk about it in the beginning, but as a part of the therapeutic process already. Okay, next, please. Okay, so again, when we say support, we do not forget prevention. Prevention in the school system as part of the curriculum. Children should know about this, be aware of this, and they should be aware of techniques, because as our previous speaker Adesi said, grooming is there. And so these are techniques that children do not know. And so we will have to pay attention to uh, the risks that are out there so that the children will know it and be able to act accordingly. Next, please. Okay. Again, this one is a description of what I said a while ago, that in the Philippines, there is a very complex, complex dynamics of online sexual exploitation, because if they have the adverse childhood experience, they may already have problems with their family and their community, and then they have socioeconomic problems, and then they may have been abused before that, or if they were not abused, they may have emotional problems, and then you are abused online. And so when we help these children, we make use of what I've just described. The TIP is the trauma-informed psychosocial processing. I think psychoeducation for the participants is already a big help. If you psychoeducate individuals about online sexual exploitation, and so children and families will be aware of it. And then secondly, you can also help them by helping them with their coping strategies. And then of course, the next step can be done by those who were trained or professionals. And then meaning making, and at the end, we include safety skills and dealing with triggers so that they will not experience a trauma. So again, in the Philippines, we already have more than 70 trained on how to do TIP. So we hope we grow in number. This is a response to the very low number of mental health practitioners dealing with children who are abused. So this is our way of helping these children as of now, because we still do not have enough mental health practitioners, and we have increasing suicide and depression and PTSD. Next, please. Okay, so again, we have to educate the parents. So your role is very crucial here. And of course, we will continue supervising, training. World Hope has been very an important help in terms of increasing the number of individuals who are trained. And when you see the outcome of the work that these social workers are doing, you feel happy that they're able to change the lives of these children, meaning that if they heal, they're better, they will be able to make better decisions and have more and lead more successful and better mental health. And so it's very important for us to increase the tribe of these social workers and psychologists who are willing to do this kind of work, which is very difficult. Next, please. So salute to them. And while we are doing this, it is important to say that TIP is not enough, but at least this is the beginning. We also have to augment it with other psychosocial interventions depending on the mental health and the dynamics and difficulties that the family is facing, and even the community at large. Next, please. Okay, so again, it should be developmentally appropriate, and it is important that we look at the problems in relation to this, and that we also, let's start with intervention modalities, that there are different therapies that can deal with the dynamics of shame, humiliation, powerlessness, fear, guilt, hopelessness, or even other mental health problems. Next, please. Okay, so as I've said, they may internalize the problem that they have. So next, please, the next slide. Okay, so additional areas that needs to be addressed so that we don't re-traumatize the children is the process of disclosure, invasion of their privacy, the failure to protect. Sometimes even when agencies will do their best, there is re-traumatization. And then also the best practices. I think we're into this when we respond to victim. And so when we have all this guide and we are trained, we will lessen the trauma experience of these children and their families. Next, please. Because sometimes other children are included in the process of rescue, even if they were not part of it. So sometimes we also traumatize the other members of the family. Now, this is the socio-ecological model for OSEC in the Philippines, 2016. So here you have the individual. You consider all the factors affecting the individual, from vulnerable child because of low education, immaturity, risk-taking behavior. You have this previous problems like substance abuse or mental health problems. And then their relationship in terms of problems at home, relationship with the pimps, with the peer influence. And then we have the community where there's lack of services. We know that in the community, our community services are still lacking. We lag behind compared to other countries. And there is shaming of survivors. You can even have cyber dens and even criminal syndicates that you have to deal with. That's why it can be difficult. And then the society as a whole, migration, lack of employment, especially now because of the COVID. That's why these are factors that will increase the number of OSEC displacement due to conflicts, presence of the military, disasters, all of this, including the present COVID, can now affect the child and the community. Next, please. Okay, so we only have, I think, 2 slides more. Next, please. Okay, so again, we have to address all of these. There are things that we can do from addressing the risk, promoting safe environment, the prevention programs, and then protection systems and intervention, which is where we are when we do the TIP. And then, of course, all of us should include awareness campaigns. Next, please. So in general, we have to situate what we're doing. Okay, next. Next, please. So this is the Philippine Plan of Action to End Violence Against Children, which will include, of course, online sexual exploitation. So we exist in doing the things that we do in this Philippine Plan of Action as a nation, that all of us will help to do all of these things in one way or another. We can contribute so that we will be able to help children with online sexual exploitation. And next slide, please. So with that, in summary, more research is needed. We have to say that victimization, of course, presents itself according to age and developmental stage, like the preschool, more of their senses, school age, academics, and adolescents are more aggressive and risk behavior taking. But having said this, that the outcome can be anxiety, depression, and trauma, there are still other children, that's just like CPU, where we have 40% who are very resilient. So some of these children may also be resilient. They're not always pathological. So we just need to help them, guide them so that they will continue with their coping mechanisms. And all of the 60% that we see usually are the ones that we need to treat. Okay, next please. Okay, so my message is that all of us should be aware of online sexual abuse, that it is a serious form of abuse, more difficult, and with additional interventions. So now we must always screen. So we always talk to our students, to people around us in the community, to screen for online behavior, online abuse, and other forms of previous abuse. And when we screen, we get the help that they need. And mostly when you talk about mental health, the 2 words to remember are effects, depression, and trauma. Okay, next please. So with that, okay, I'd like to thank everyone that you're still here with me, and have a pleasant good morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nori. My name is Haley Clark. I'm the Director of Anti-Trafficking and Gender-Based Violence for World Hope International. And it is my privilege to be with you here today. I know that we have people from all over the world, multiple countries joining, so really it's exciting. I wanted to remind you that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please put your questions in there. I've seen some great questions in the chat box, but if they go in the Q&A, then hopefully we won't miss them. We also will have a brief time at the end to openly answer some questions. But for now, some of my colleagues at World Hope are answering those questions in real time, which is great. And if you would like to join the conversation on social media, please use the hashtag #EndingOSEC. Great. Well, Dr. Nori said, rightly so, that there is a need for additional research. And we, through the PAVE project, partnered with some researchers to do some research. There definitely is more that is needed. But we partnered with Dr. Carrie Bassett of Roberts Wesleyan College, along with Rebecca Draper for this particular body of research. And it used a mixed methods design to identify the psychosocial needs and treatment considerations for survivors of OSEC. So the objectives of this research was to explore the experiences of social workers, to analyze archival data, which was collected through the PAVE project, to fill in gaps in the existing literature on the needs and treatment options for OSEC survivors, and also to identify what needs should be incorporated into an effective treatment process for OSEC survivors. These are the research questions that were asked. First of all, what are the characteristics and psychosocial needs of survivors of OSEC in residential care? Second, what are the lived experiences of social workers providing psychosocial interventions to OSEC survivors? And how effective are psychosocial interventions in reducing trauma-related symptomatology in OSEC survivors? Next slide, please. The methodology, as I mentioned, archival data was used. That included the PTAC. Questionnaires were used. The child psychotherapy questionnaire was given to social workers. And finally, semi-structured interviews were given to the social workers, 21 of them, who participated directly in this research. Here is some details about the social workers. As I said, there were 21 of them. 11 of them were trained in EXA, which is the arts-based intervention. 10 were trained in TIPP. The mean age was 30.2 years. They had an average of 6.6 years of professional experience in social work prior to their participation. And 11 of these 21 went through an in-depth interview process. So 106 OSEC survivors, their information was used. Here is a profile of them. 87% of them were female, 13% were male. The mean age was 13.42 years. And this chart shows the relationship that they had with the perpetrator. So you can see 40% of them, the perpetrator was the parent of the client. Okay. This explains where they were placed post-rescue and also what kind of treatment intervention they received. So you can see 65% of them were placed within an NGO, 22% were within a government shelter, 13% of them remained community-based. And then intervention, 42.5% received TIPP, 17.9 received EXA, 6.6 received game-based CBT, and 14.2% received both TIPP and game-based CBT. So I want to share with you the results of the research. This will be the characteristics and psychosocial needs of survivors of OSEC. This is the first answer to the first question. So this is a typical profile of an OSEC client. So a few items from here that I will read. The child will discuss his or her parents in counseling. The child is curious. The child asks advice or information. The child is active, seeks greater intimacy with the social worker. And then atypical qualities of OSEC survivors. Can move to the next slide. Okay, I think it skipped a slide. Okay, the child, I'll just read a couple. It's the next one, sorry. The child attributes their own characteristics or feelings to the social worker. The child expresses negative feelings. The child is wary or suspicious. The child is socially misattuned or inappropriate. These were the lowest scoring attributes of OSEC clients. So now I want to talk a little bit about the trauma levels of OSEC survivors. So as I said, we used the PTAC, we used those scores, and the mean PTAC score was 31.9, which showed a mild level of trauma. 25 of the clients scored above the clinical cutoff, and trauma-related symptoms did not vary based on age or gender, which is an interesting piece of data. So the trauma levels for survivors, they really increased based on the distance in relationship of the child to the perpetrator. So the trauma levels for children who were perpetrated by family members was the lowest. Okay, now the second question, which was, what are the lived experiences of social workers? So the first theme that came out of this is that survivors often lack signs of observable trauma. So they have few signs of PTSD. One social worker reported that this was often dependent on the type of abuse that they had experienced. This lack of signs of observable trauma can really impact the social worker's perception of the client. So the lack of symptoms may be surprising to them, and it might make treatment more difficult. Finally, outward signs of trauma may increase as the treatment continues. So as the client has a greater understanding of the abuse that happened to them, their trauma scores may increase along with observable signs of the trauma. The second theme was that survivors don't always perceive OSEC as abuse. So they might deny the abuse. They find it very hard to believe that a loved one would abuse them. They downplay it. You know, they might say, oh, it was just a picture. And finally, they believe that their behavior was helpful to the family. So it's easier to downplay it when you're helping the family. Theme 3, survivors often have pre-existing family dysfunctions. So Dr. Nori spoke about this some, and this research really confirmed that to be true. There's often a history of verbal and physical abuse within the family. The child and the family have limited life skills, and there's been limited parental guidance throughout the child's life. The fourth theme is that survivors are traumatized by the rescue. So really the nature of the rescue itself is damaging to them. They may blame the police officers, the social service providers who were there when it happened. It can be very confusing because they're being taken away from their family members. They feel like they've been caught by the police. Theme number 5. Survivors struggle with being separated from their family. So they miss their family members a lot. Reintegration with family is a very slow and lengthy process. And being separated from family is stressful and traumatic. This is what one social worker said, regardless of the service we provide for them. Theme number 6. Survivors often have limited self-disclosure. So this could be for several reasons. They might be fearful of incriminating family and loved ones. There's a lack of trust with the people that they're talking to, and they may feel shame about the behavior that they were involved in. Theme 7. Psychoeducation is important for survivors. So psychoeducation defines the abuse for the child. It helps to decrease negative feelings, and it prevents future abuse from happening. Theme 8, survivors require time and patience to heal. So I'd like to read a few quotes from social workers. The first quote was, "To effectively overcome their lack of disclosure, their abuse, and their ability to label their feelings and situation, the counselor must be patient. You cannot just use the treatment strategies alone." The second quote was, "You have to tell them over and over again that it's not their fault that their parents got apprehended. Every day you have to be patient because deep down they do not understand." I thought those were really powerful quotes from the social workers. Okay. So trauma-informed psychosocial processing, or TIPP, that was looked at in the research. And the first theme that came out of that is the client's utilization of coping skills was quite good after going through this. So 4 out of 5 of the social workers who participated in this research said that they had observed their clients utilizing coping skills. A second theme of TIPP is that the trauma narrative can be problematic, and this could be for several reasons. One, it's difficult for the survivor to actually identify that OSEC is abusive. And then theme number 3, it's effective with a limited clientele. So typically children who can identify the abuse and recognize the experience as abusive, they do better with TIPP. And if also older children, so children that have more verbal skills, more skills at writing and drawing do better. Second, we'll look at EXA. This is the trauma-informed expressive arts therapy. The first theme from that is increased disclosures and processing of personal experiences. The second theme is that clients really enjoy the EXA therapy. And the third is that behavioral problems during group sessions are fairly common. So with TAPP, that's done one-on-one, and so it's easier to work with the child, and they're the center of attention. But in EXA, it's a big group, and they might fight over crayons or argue over different things, trying to get the social worker's attention. So that was just one thing that was noticed. Okay, and the final question was looking at the effectiveness of psychosocial interventions in reducing trauma-related symptomatology in OSEC survivors. So the therapeutic interventions, the mean post-intervention PTEC score was 23.29, while the mean pre-intervention PTEC was 31.64. So there was a significant reduction in trauma-related symptoms after approximately 12 weeks in treatment. Okay, finally, the implications of the research findings. First of all, trauma-informed interventions are beneficial to traumatized OSEC survivors and should continue to be an important part of their treatment. Go ahead. Secondly, it's important to expand the understanding and education of service providers regarding the mental health needs of OSEC survivors. And thirdly, aspects of the Filipino system for addressing and combating OSEC may perpetuate trauma for survivors. So that includes the rescue operations. Often there's a lack of confidentiality, requiring survivors to testify in court against loved ones, and then the family separation involved often perpetuate the trauma. Okay, so as I said, we will have a time for questions at the very end. So be thinking about anything you want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Haley, for that presentation. So for our not the least speaker for today's webinar is Dr. Cindy Perl Milencio. She is the PAVE project manager at the Salvation Army. Salvation Army, leading the implementation of the protection pillar of the Child Protection Compact. She earned her master's in public administration from De La Salle University and her doctor of public administration from Southwestern University. So Dr. Milencio had an extensive experience in the spearheading development works, having served as a social worker and an area coordinator at the Department of Social Welfare and Development as a child protection specialist, the national program manager of Plan International. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Cindy Perl Milencio to present the psychosocial services for OSEC survivors.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you, Miss Gina. Thank you, Haley. So, hi, my part is to really share with you our work at the shelter, where we serve children, victim survivors of online sexual exploitation. So the shelter holds 7 social workers directly working with clients toward their healing and recovery. So here you can see a daily routine schedule of our children inside the shelter. So it is just a normal routine of children in a family setting, except that we have structured therapeutic interventions to every client that we serve. So first are the home life activities of children. These activities will help clients learn basic household chores. They wash dishes, clean backyards, cook for their meals, wash their own clothes, among other age-appropriate house duties. So the youngest we have right now at the shelter is a 5-year-old little girl, but she has an assigned daily task that will also prepare her for independence. It is a life skill training. What's amazing is that when children are reintegrated, their families were very grateful for teaching their kids to cooperate in housework. Parents of reintegrated children share that cleaning the house and washing the dishes has become a habit of the child, and that they have lessened the burden of their mother in domestic work, which is a good story to share. So amid life changes, being away from their family, especially this time of health crisis, shouldn't face greater risk of social isolation. So other activities at the shelter is the free play or leisure time. Every after supervised house duties, children have their time to gather together and engage for 2 hours in physical activities. So children at the shelter will call it recess time. So they feel like they have been released from the classroom. So these daily routines have helped children develop their social skill and promote good behavior towards other survivors. One of the clients shared that she never thought that it is more fun to always play outside than soaking themselves on mobile phones. Because prior to their placement at the shelter, clients' daily routine was spending much time on TV or cell phones, which is very common to children at home nowadays. So the guided play helps them self-regulate as they follow norms and pay attention while experiencing feelings such as anticipation and frustration. So the free play teaches the clients how to set and change rules and how to decide when to lead and when to follow. So the guided play is one of the best therapeutic interventions at the shelter towards clients' healing and recovery. So while children's health at a shelter is less likely to get affected by COVID, the outbreak, however, deeply affects their emotions. This is where the shelter provides psychosocial support activities. The shelter use game-based and arts-based therapy, or we call it expressive arts therapy in general. It is a powerful tool in extracting information from the clients that is child-friendly and interactive compared to formal counseling sessions. So it encourages children to express and share their feelings in a form of arts, meditation, singing, and dancing. So in our experience at the shelter, those clients who are having difficulty sharing her stories take part in meditation. The younger ones were more interested on arts, and older children sing and dance. And in terms of shaping a child's character, the shelter introduces weekly character building activities, including spiritual gatherings. The clients participate in daily devotion and Sunday service, inside the shelter. So we have a chaplain, the Salvation Army chaplain, who takes the lead in it. So we always make room for whatever emotions and thoughts come up for our clients. So whatever each of them is feeling or thinking, we consider responding with something like, it's okay that you're feeling this way, thinking about those thoughts. Rest assured that we are here to listen. We are here for anything that she needs. So lastly is that we engage our children to family self-care. One way to help them cope with worries from family separation. Our clients could talk to the family members every Saturdays for 30 minutes through a supervised video call to help establish a sense of control in a situation that feels very out of control. So clients remain connected to their families while at the shelter, a very helpful strategy to strengthen family relations. So the family members provide updates on the outside world. So in situations like this, children's protection and well-being may be put at risk. So it is important to be more vigilant in our neighboring communities in order to prevent and end online sexual exploitation of children. So yun lamang po at maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig. Thank you everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Miss Cindy Pearl, for that presentation. So I think we have some time for some questions. So may I request all our panelists to be available on video, if possible. Okay, so we'll go to the question box. So, okay, let me pick. I think we can entertain 2 or 3 questions. No? Okay. So we have here to Miss Haley or any speakers can answer this. Our culture actually is a bit suppressed in allowing children to talk or verbalize, not just like the Western children, or just allowing them to voice their opinions. They're actually shut off from their opinion. Are there Asian studies about this behavior culture affecting our children in being very vulnerable to sexual abuse, OSEC, or related problems?
That's a great question, and I completely hear you that culture has such a big impact. And I mean, even children worldwide often have difficulty speaking about sexual abuse. I will ask my other panelists if they're aware of any research out there fitting that criteria.
For OSEC, we still do not have right now in terms of, I think, as I've said, we need to research the effect of culture and how these children are going to present their problems in the same way that, for example, for Filipinos, usually they keep their feelings to themselves and smile on the outside. We see this after disasters, they seem to be doing well, they're okay, but in reality, they're not. So we'll have to look at the spectrum where they do not talk. The other one is how do they manifest their emotions in times when you have OSEC. So I think we really need further studies because of the dynamics that we've already mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Doc Nordy. Any more who wants to answer? And that question is from Miss Maribeth Baril. Okay, so if no one else would like to answer, there's another question from Ms. Zinaida Rosales, I think. So family self-care How do you address the complexity of this issue wherein the parents are also part of the problem? How do you separate love and abuse with OSEC cases? Anybody who wants to answer that question?
Okay, so I think what we can do here is the way we also do it for example, at the CP, when you have parents who are the perpetrators of physical abuse. So often we see them, they consult us, and we find out that, for example, they have sexual abuse, and then we find out there's also physical abuse, or if the perpetrator is the family. So we separate the management of the team. So it has really to be a team dealing with the concerns of the perpetrators, and then a team that deals with the concerns of the victim or the survivor. And then when you have already done all of this, that's when you put together all the things that you have said. And then we want to, of course, in the end, when everything is said, is we want them to be together. So that's the end line, if it is possible. So for example, for the OSEC, what we can do is do the psychoeducation, and then the concerns, the psychosocial needs, the reason why in the first place they needed money, and then if they have other behavioral problems or mental health problems, or that there is really a possibility that the child will be safe with the family or the parents. So I think that's how we're going to deal with it, the way we're dealing with other types of abuse where the perpetrator is also a parent, or that they are also not safe with the parents. So social workers will look for other places where the child is safe in the meantime, while we're doing all the other interventions. And in the end, hopefully, when you have done all the interventions, we will be able to deal with them as a family, as a whole. So it really takes a team in order to do all of this, and it will really take time because from my experience, for example, it really takes time. Like we do have abuse where you have a lot of the perpetrators are siblings, mga auntie, the ones who involve them with the videos. You also have even neighbors. You have the family. You can have even the community involved. So it's really all of them. So that is why it's not just the parents. We really have to help change the mindset of people in the community. So even if, let's say, you change the parents or you help the parents, but if they live in the same community where it is perpetuated, then there's again a risk. So it's really in the Philippines, I think, the slide where it is macro, it's micro and also macro at the same time through the community. That's very, very important as well. So in other words, we have a lot of things to do at the same time, which is basically what we're doing already. We just need to treat it on a case-to-case basis.
Thank you, Doc. Mayroon pa po bang gustong sumagot? Okay, sige. So, one last question na lang kasi it's we're running out of time. So, how long does an OSEC client recover from his or her traumatic experience? From Ms. Agusta Altubar.
Okay, so in terms of the treatment for OSEC survivors, one thing that, as you've seen in the research a while ago, is there's usually hesitation in terms of disclosure as to, and so estimation as to how long it's going to take is something that's going to be difficult because there's really no standard time frame for that. Usually, and I saw this in a lot, I saw this question in the Q&A, a lot of you are asking about how do you really deal with OSEC survivors who are really hesitant? And as you've seen in the research reported by Haley a while ago, that's where we start with. The survivors, most of them are really very suspicious, they are mistrustful because they are suddenly separated from their families. Remember, in their minds, everything is normal. I'm with mom, I'm with dad, I'm with my siblings. And then suddenly the rescue happens. And so that's very disruptive. And then you bring them to the shelter. In their mind, the narrative is, I was taken. I was taken. I was not rescued. It's more of like I was jailed and not really I was rescued, because in their minds the abuse that's happening in their home is really normal. And so to answer that question, the social workers and all the other case managers will really have to start with investing a lot on building rapport with the survivors, investing a lot on developing trust with the survivors, and then not directly dwell on the trauma story that they have. The social worker really has to develop a very strong therapeutic alliance first with the survivor, and then up until a time wherein the child is already ready to tackle the trauma experience. And then that would usually take really a time. But then as to a time frame, it would be really difficult to estimate that. But definitely, it will take a little longer.
Okay. Yes.
Okay,
So,
so
anyone want to answer?
So, yeah, so the response there is it may vary according to the development of the child. And then, as we've said, if on top of it you already have previous abuse or you have a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and then you know the outcome is better if you have better support system. And the systems can be the NGO and also the community itself. So if you look at all of these factors, if you are able to address all of this, ideally, if you do therapy within a year's time, they're supposed to already have their coping mechanisms. But as we've said, OSEC, the pictures are all there, so there's always that fear. But I think if they develop enough coping mechanisms, I think by that time, more or less, they will be functional and be able to deal and heal from it. But the problem is when the pictures will come out again, or there are there is revictimization. That's when you prolong the I think the process of healing. But mostly, I think within a year's time, it's usually within that time, and it's more for others, and it will depend on several factors. So we usually say 8 to 12 sessions. That usually within what years time. That supposedly they are able to cope and be able to deal with their trauma.
And I also wanted to mention that the care provided by social workers goes beyond the therapeutic sessions and beyond their time in the shelter. They need to have a lot of follow-up support to ensure that safety exists in the home, and to address the dynamics that are there with the child living in sometimes a new home, sometimes with a new caregiver, especially when the parents are incarcerated. So the healing process is really a long one, and one that has a lot of facets to it.
Yeah. Any more? Who wants to add? I think no more. So thank you to our panelists for the information that was provided. I think to add lang for our what's next on this webinar. So the World Hope International and the CPTCSA will conduct series of trainings on how to address mental health issues of OSEC to social workers. So am I right, Ms. Adesti, about this? Yeah. So maybe for us to understand more the complexity of the mental issues brought about by OSEC. So we will provide announcement and details about this training in the coming year. So that's so, Miss Adesti. Okay, so I know that
Let me say
yeah.
something. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the chat box. If you haven't seen already, my colleague Fred has dropped a link in there to complete a survey. So please do that by 4 p.m. today, and we will email you a certificate.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much to all who participated to this webinar. Yes, Ms. Adesti.
Yeah, I would just like to add, as mentioned by Ms. Gina a while ago, this is just an introduction to a series of trainings that we provide for care providers who are handling OSEC survivors. This is mostly focused on therapeutic interventions that work for OSEC survivors, which would include TIPP, expressive arts therapy, gay-based. And so if you are interested, please watch out for announcements as to when these are going to be conducted within the next few months. Thank you so much again for attending.
Okay, so that's all for this webinar. Thank you sa lahat. So reminder again, so there's a link that you can click and answer our feedback form, and you will get your e-certificate. So the deadline for submission of our feedback form is at 4 o'clock this afternoon.